Part 3. The Gift of the Eagle. The wasteland was a furnace of sand and stone that stretched beyond sight, beyond hope, beyond any possibility of survival. Marcus and David had been walking for 3 days since their exile from Corvara, and death was no longer a possibility but a certainty. The only question was when. Their feet had long since ceased to feel like feet. The burning sand had stripped away skin, then flesh, leaving raw wounds that cracked and bled with each step. But the blood dried instantly in the merciless heat, leaving rusty trails that marked their path like a countdown to oblivion. They had stopped speaking after the first day. What was there to say? They were two men who hadn't known each other before their mutual rejection, united only by the brand burned into their foreheads and the shared knowledge that they were too worthless even for sacrifice. Marcus, the scribe, had tried to maintain some dignity at first, walking upright despite the pain, keeping his ink-stained fingers closed as if still holding a pen. But by the second day, he crawled as much as walked, his scholarly pretensions burned away by the sun that seemed to hate them personally. David, the carpenter, had lasted longer. His body, despite its imperfections, had strength built from years of working wood. But even he was failing now, his mangled hand clutched around the small wooden bird he'd brought, the only thing the priests hadn't taken. Sometimes he would look at it and move his lips, speaking to his dead wife perhaps, or to the bird itself, asking why its wings couldn't carry them away from this hell. By the third day's noon, when the sun reached its apex and the heat became a living thing that pressed down on them like the weight of the gods' contempt, they could go no further. They collapsed in the minimal shade of a rock formation, two twisted pillars of stone that rose from the desert like markers of some ancient grave.
This is where we die.
David didn't respond. He was staring at the sky with eyes that had gone beyond seeing, holding his wooden bird against his chest like a talisman. His breathing was shallow, irregular. Marcus knew the signs. He had recorded enough deaths in Corvara to recognize the approaching end. That's when they saw it. At first, Marcus thought it was a hallucination. The heat created mirages, made the air shimmer with false promises of water. But this shadow that passed over them was real, briefly blocking the murderous sun. An eagle. But as it circled lower, Marcus realized this was no ordinary bird. It was massive, with a wingspan that seemed impossible, feathers that caught the light in ways that suggested metal rather than keratin. Its eyes, even from a distance, burned with an intelligence that was older than Corvara, older than the priests' hungry gods.
David. Do you see it?
David's eyes focused with effort, followed Marcus's pointing finger.
Beautiful. Like my bird, but real. Flying.
The eagle descended in lazy spirals, each pass bringing it closer. Marcus felt a primal fear building in his gut. This was no scavenger come to wait for their deaths. This was something else, something with purpose. It landed on one of the rock pillars, talons gouging deep furrows in stone that should have been too hard for any living thing to mark. Up close, it was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. Its head moved with mechanical precision, studying them with eyes that held depths of gold and shadow.
Please.
Though he didn't know what he was begging for. Death. Salvation. Simply an end to the waiting. The eagle cocked its head, as if considering. Then it moved. The attack was so swift that Marcus's eyes couldn't follow it. One moment the eagle was perched above them, the next it was on David, its talons punching through his chest like spears through parchment. David's scream was cut short as the eagle's beak, sharp as any blade, tore into his throat. Blood sprayed across the sand, across Marcus, hot and shocking in its vitality. The eagle worked with terrible efficiency, not the random tearing of a predator but the precise dissection of something that knew exactly what it wanted. It ripped open David's chest with surgical precision, talons peeling back skin and muscle to expose the cavity beneath. The sound was horrific wet tearing mixed with the crack of breaking ribs. David's eyes were still open, still aware for those first terrible moments, looking at Marcus with an expression of betrayal and understanding mixed together. The eagle plunged its head into the opened chest, pulling out organs with deliberate selection. The heart first, still beating weakly, which it swallowed whole. Then the liver, dark and glistening. It left the lungs, the stomach, the intestines, taking only specific parts as if following some ancient recipe. Marcus couldn't move, couldn't look away. He was frozen by shock and a horrible fascination. The wooden bird had fallen from David's dead fingers, landing in a pool of blood that spread across the sand like a dark mirror. The feeding continued for what felt like hours but was probably minutes. The eagle was methodical, almost ritualistic in its consumption. When it finally raised its head, its beak and breast were soaked crimson, and David was no longer recognizable as human. He was a ruin of flesh and exposed bone, spread across the sand in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. The eagle looked at Marcus with those impossible eyes, and he felt something probe at his mind, not thoughts exactly, but something deeper. It nodded once, a disturbingly human gesture, then launched itself skyward with wings that thundered in the still air. Marcus watched it disappear into the white-hot sky, then looked back at what remained of David. The blood was everywhere, pooled in the sand, splattered on the rocks, coating Marcus himself. The smell of it filled his nostrils, metallic and rich. And he was so thirsty. The thought horrified him even as his body moved without his permission. He had gone 3 days without water, and here was liquid. Hot, yes. Blood, yes. But liquid.
No. This is abomination. This is madness.
But the thirst was stronger than revulsion, stronger than his humanity. He was going to die anyway. What did it matter if he died a monster rather than a man? End of Part 1. Part 2. The Transformation. The first taste was electric. The blood hit his tongue like lightning, like liquid fire that burned and soothed simultaneously. His parched throat, which had been closed to almost nothing, opened greedily. He drank deeper, pressing his face into the pool, not caring that he was lapping blood from sand like an animal. The second mouthful brought sensation flooding back to his dying body. He could feel his burnt feet beginning to heal, the cracked and bleeding flesh knitting itself together. His vision, which had been dimming, sharpened to impossible clarity. He could see individual grains of sand, the pattern of David's scattered ribs, the way the blood moved with its own strange life. The third swallow changed everything. Power flooded through him like nothing he had ever imagined. Not just physical strength, though that was there, his muscles reforming, strengthening beyond human limits, but something deeper. He could smell things he had no names for, the age of the rocks, the distant approach of night, the lingering essence of David's terror and pain. He drank deeper, unable to stop. The blood wasn't just sustaining him, it was transforming him. Each drop that passed his lips rewrote something fundamental in his being. His skin paled, then took on an alabaster perfection. His fingernails lengthened, hardened. His teeth were changing, canines extending into something designed for a very specific purpose. When he raised his head from the blood pool, gasping, he could hear everything. Insects moving beneath the sand 20 feet away. The whisper of wind that hadn't reached him yet. And most disturbing of all, he could hear blood. Not David's, that was now silent, consumed, but his own, moving through his veins with a new rhythm, a new purpose. He stood, and the movement was liquid grace. Where before he had been a middle-aged scribe with a bent back and soft muscles, now he was something else. Something that moved like a predator, perfectly balanced, every gesture efficient and deadly. The sun, which had been his tormentor, now felt different. Not pleasant, it still hurt, made his new skin prickle with discomfort, but no longer deadly. He was beyond such simple things as heatstroke and dehydration now. Marcus looked down at David's remains and felt nothing. No grief for the man who had shared his exile. No revulsion at what he had done. The David who had existed was gone, but his blood lived on in Marcus's veins, transformed into something greater.
Thank you. Your death had meaning after all. Just not the meaning the priests intended.
He picked up the wooden bird from the blood-soaked sand. It was unfinished, wings spread but incomplete, forever frozen in the moment before flight. Like David himself had been forever attempting to soar, never quite achieving it. But now, through his blood, David had given Marcus wings of a different sort. Marcus turned toward Corvara, though it was too far to see. He could feel it though, like a lodestone pulling at his transformed flesh. All those heartbeats, all that blood, singing to him across the wasteland. The priests had cast him out as worthless, had branded him with the mark of rejection, had sent him to die forgotten in the desert. They were about to learn what happened when the worthless found worth in darkness. When the rejected became something that rejection itself could not touch. When those deemed unworthy of sacrifice became something that would make sacrifice itself meaningless. Marcus began walking back toward Corvara, no longer stumbling, no longer weak. Each step was purposeful, powerful. The brand on his forehead still burned, but now it felt like a crown rather than a curse. He was marked, yes, but marked for something greater than anyone could have imagined. As he walked, he thought about what he would do when he reached the village. The priests first, certainly. Matthias, who had pronounced him worthless, would learn what worth really meant. The guards who had marched them into the desert would discover that some things returned from exile stronger than before. But more than simple revenge, Marcus wanted to prove something. That their entire system, the sacrifices, the blood on the altar, the selection of worthy and unworthy, was built on a fundamental misunderstanding. The gods they fed were not the only powers in the world. There were older things, darker things, that took the rejected and transformed them into something that would make the gods themselves tremble. The sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of red that reminded Marcus of the blood he had consumed. He felt the hunger building already. David's blood had awakened something that would never be satisfied. But that was fine. Corvara had plenty of blood. All those people who had watched him branded and cast out, who had been relieved it wasn't them, who had returned to their lives thinking themselves safe. They would feed him. One way or another, they would all feed him. As darkness fell, Marcus's pace increased. He moved through the night like a shadow given form, covering distances that would have taken days in mere hours. His new senses made the darkness irrelevant. He could see the heat of small animals, smell water sources miles away, hear the heartbeat of anything living. But it was the absence of heartbeat that drove him forward. David's silence, the ultimate sacrifice that had not been a sacrifice at all but a transformation. The carpenter had given his blood freely, if unknowingly, and in doing so had created something that would reshape the world's understanding of power, worth, and divinity itself. Marcus paused on a ridge, Corvara visible now in the distance, its temple fires burning like stars that had fallen to earth. He could smell the blood from here, animal and human both, soaking into that hungry altar stone.
I'm coming. I was Marcus the scribe, the worthless, the rejected. But now I am something else. Something without name yet, but with purpose.
He thought of David one more time, the carpenter who had wanted nothing more than to finish his wooden bird, to capture the moment of flight. In a way, he had succeeded. Through his death, through his blood, he had given Marcus the ability to soar above human limitations. The transformation was complete. The gift of the eagle, not just death, but selection, transformation, elevation through consumption, had been received. What had been two rejected men walking into death was now one transformed creature walking back toward vengeance. And Marcus, who no longer thought of himself by that name but had not yet chosen another, smiled with teeth that were no longer meant for anything but blood. The priests wanted sacrifice. He would give them sacrifice. But it would be their blood on the altar, their lives that would feed something darker and more ancient than their petty gods. The gift of the eagle was transformation through death, power through consumption, becoming through blood. And Marcus intended to share that gift with everyone who had deemed him unworthy of even death itself. The age of sacrifice was about to learn what happened when the sacrifice returned, transformed, hungry, and absolutely without mercy. End of episode 3, The Gift of the Eagle.